Well, good morning, everybody. How are we doing today? Glad you are here. My name's Kurt. I'm one of the pastors here at Restoration. It's great to see you. For those of you tuning in online, we're glad you are here as well. We'd love to know where you're watching from in the comments. Let us know. We'd love to say hi. We are in week 3 of this series we started called Permission Slips. I do not have a whiteboard this Sunday. I did last Sunday. But it's been a really fun series, just diving into this question of where do we find permission to live the life that God actually dreams and designed us to live. I don't know about you, if you are a parent and your kids have either gone back to school this week or you're counting down the days till Wednesday like we are in our house. We can't wait, but we've gotten all the emails and all the stuff and all the field trips that our daughter's going to go on, our son's going to go on this year, and it's like, fill out all the permission slips. And it really was where this idea for this series kind of launched from, was whenever you're doing something out of the ordinary, you're going to go to SeaWorld and study aquatic life, or study physics at Six Flags, or whatever it is, something that gets you out of the classroom when you're a kid, something that you look forward to, you have to usually get a permission slip signed to go off campus and to do something more exciting. And the question is for us as adults, where do we kind of get stuck in that same mindset that there is a place outside of us that we have to look for permission to step into an extraordinary life? And so we started week 1 saying you actually have permission, that the God of the universe has given you permission to play your unique part in his mission in the world. And we talked last week about how our purpose, this individual evasive thing that we are all trying to find and figure out, that your purpose in life is actually found in the intersection of a problem and your passion and the possibility that God believes for you. And so today, we are looking at what does it look like to actually put that purpose to work. And it's been so fun, even just, this doesn't always happen, but it was just so cool this week to have 5 different conversations with people that after last week's message, they, are making pretty significant moves in their life. They're going after a dream that they had put off. They're being willing to sacrifice something for something that feels like it aligns with their life and their gift and their story, even though they don't know how it's all going to work out. They're getting, really excited about something that one time was kind of a drag, or they're ending a relationship or stepping into a new relationship with courage. It's just been really, really fun to see how people are putting what we're learning together in the scriptures to work in their life. And so I hope the same is true today. We enlisted some of the greatest music stars of the last 30 years to help encourage you. So we'll get to it. So if you don't like what I have to say, listen to Eminem or Ace of Base. So the idea for today, in case you have to leave early, it really centers around this one thing. I'm just going to leave it to you at the top, right? Is that your purpose always involves you, but it never revolves around you. That my purpose always involves me, this thing that I'm set up to do, this unique space I get to play in the world, it always involves me, but it never revolves around me. And you've met people, you've experienced a boss or a neighbor or a friend, maybe you've lived this way at different seasons in your life, we probably all have, where we think our purpose just kind of revolves around us, our happiness, our success, our promotion. And if you do that for a while it might work for a little bit, you always end up wanting. And that's where there's extraordinarily wealthy people or extraordinarily beautiful people that are depressed and annoyed with life. And you're like, if I had what they had, I would be so happy and content. And you're like, why are they so upset? It's because when we revolve our purpose exclusively around ourselves, it's actually a much smaller life that we live than the one we were designed for. I was reading this week about Herb Keller, who was the former CEO of Southwest Airlines, who kind of created the idea of a low-cost airline and led the company for 40 consecutive years of profit. Even through 9/11, it was the only airline that was still profitable in 2001. And Herb was known amongst the company and even amongst other leadership circles of showing up as the CEO in coveralls on Thanksgiving weekend and working side by side with the baggage handlers of Southwest in Dallas, Texas, outside of Dallas, Texas at Love Field, on the busiest travel days of the year, saying, hey, if this is what matters to our company, then even at the highest level of the company, I want to be where the action is. And he wasn't too big or too rich or too powerful to show up and serve. And I don't know what that feels like to hear that to you. You're like, man, I wish my boss was like that. Like, I would love to work for someone like that. You definitely would love to hire someone like that. And the question for us to wrestle with today is, do we want to be someone like that? Like, do you and I, in whatever sphere or area of your life, do you want to be someone who says, I'm not too big to serve? That if we are actually following the way of Jesus, that leadership will actually be beyond us if serving is beneath us. And so to kick it off, we're going to look at a story that John, Jesus' best friend, records where Jesus really speaks this idea into the life of a guy named Simon Peter. So if you have a Bible, you can turn to John chapter 21. If not, there's a blue Bible in the seat back pocket directly in front of you. It looks just like this. You can grab it. If you grab this Bible, we're going to begin on page 652. That'll help jumpstart you to get there a little faster. 652 in the blue Bible. If you're tuning in online, you can open up another tab, go to John 21. As you're turning there, to give you some context, this is after the crucifixion, death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. He has come back to life. He has displayed himself to multiple people. There's this kind of energy that's starting to pick up in and around Jerusalem. People saying, I think he's alive. He's back to life. That's crazy, right? Like, how do we believe this? What do we say? Like, people look at us funny when we say we've seen Jesus. And even Jesus' closest followers, those who traveled with him for 3 years, saw him do incredible miracles, who claimed they would be with him to the end, and yet all abandoned him, have seen him again alive, but they still don't know what to do with that. They still don't know what that means for their daily life and decisions, because the movement that they thought they were being a part of at the beginning now has dramatically changed because the leader was killed. And so Peter, who is a fisherman, he decides, I'm going to go back to my old life. So John, who is one of Jesus' best friends, records this for us in John 21, starting in verse 1. It says, later, Jesus appeared again to the disciples beside the Sea of Galilee. And this is how it happened. Several of the disciples were there. Simon Peter, Thomas, who is nicknamed the twin, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, which was John talking about himself, and 2 other disciples. And Simon Peter, probably frustrated, probably just like, I don't know what to do with the rest of my life. I had a plan, and now that plan is derailed. I'm going to go back to the family business. He says, I'm going fishing. And we'll come too, they all said. Most of them were fishermen before they started following Jesus, so it was jumping back into an old habit. And they went out in the boat. They went all night and they caught nothing. And then at dawn, John remembers, Jesus was standing on the beach, but the disciples couldn't see who he was. So he called out to them. It says, friends, have you caught any fish? No, they replied. Apparently they had forgotten how to be good fishermen. They hadn't caught anything all night. And he said, throw your net out to the right side of your boat, and you'll catch them there. So they did. And they caught so many that they couldn't haul it into the net because there were so many fish in it. This is actually a throwback to the way that Jesus actually initially invited Peter to come and follow him. He repeats this kind of miracle. The others stayed in the boat and pulled the loaded net to shore, right? But Peter says, it's the Lord. So Simon Peter heard it was the Lord. He put on his tunic, for he had stripped for work. He jumps into the water and swims to the beach. The others pulled everything in, and they were about 100 yards from shore. And when they got there, they found that breakfast was waiting for them, fish cooking over a charcoal fire, and some bread. Now notice that when Jesus shows up and re-enters the story and is inviting his followers to kind of re-engage with the life he had invited them to in the first place, one of the first things he does for his friends is that he serves them. That while there was a miraculous moment, the next step that Jesus takes is to extend hospitality. He serves them breakfast. And he says to them, bring some fish that you've just caught that I helped you catch, right? So bring some of your fish too. Because Jesus not only is here to serve, but actually to empower us to be involved in the miracle as well. And so Simon Peter went aboard, dragged the net to shore. There were about 153 large fish, but the net hadn't torn yet. Now come have some breakfast, Jesus said. None of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew it was the Lord, but they were stunned. So Jesus served them the bread and the fish, and this was the third time that Jesus had appeared to his disciples since he had been raised from the dead. Now, this next section of the story that we're going to talk to is really, really important because this is kind of the precursor to the launch of the church. The moment that we read about in Acts chapter 3 on the day of Pentecost, when under Peter's leadership, the church begins and the idea of gathering communities of people who want to love and follow Jesus together, that story seems to be almost impossible without this next interaction. Because remember, Peter had given up on himself, on the mission that Jesus had invited him into, and he had gone back to his old way of life, having talked a really, really big game and then denied Jesus 3 times in his greatest moment of need. The shame he carried was too heavy for him to see a possibility in the future. And so Jesus, the great teacher, steps in and asks him an incredible question. So after breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John," he calls him his given name because he had gone back to his original way of life. "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Perhaps pointing to the fish. "Yes, Lord," Peter said. "You know I love you." "Then feed my lambs," Jesus told him, having previously described himself as the good shepherd. "Feed my lambs. Do something different than what you went back to." Jesus repeated the question, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord," Peter said. "You know I love you. Then take care of my sheep." A third time he asked him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter is frustrated. He's hurt that he's being asked this so many times, but perhaps it dawns on him that Jesus is asking him a third time to forgive and to allow him to forgive himself and move on from his third denial. "Do you love me?" Peter was hurt that the question was asked the third time, but he said, "Lord, you know everything, and you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Then feed my sheep." See, Peter was so caught up in his past mistakes and his past decisions that he thought he was outside of being used by God. Ever feel that way? I know I have. The things you've done or the lack of faith that you feel you have or the way that you have lived your life up to this point or how busy you are, you assume that you can't be used by God. And yet this passage is so important because it demonstrates to us incredibly clearly that while we might be willing to give up on ourselves, Jesus never is. That we wonder if God can use us. And the fact is that Jesus is always willing and ready to use us. The question is, are we willing and ready to be used? See, Peter, he thought he had to give up on his purpose because he understood his purpose was in keeping religious law and following Jesus with perfection. He thought that's what it meant to follow this rabbi. That's what he thought it meant to be a follower of Jesus. And the question is, for many of us, where do you and I get stuck in that same assumption? That your purpose, your job, your spiritual journey requires you to never falter or fail in your following of Jesus. And yet I think it's so powerful, and the reason that perhaps Peter was used so powerfully later in his life was not because he did it right all the time, but because he actually knew what it was like to fail and to be forgiven and to be restored. See, it's one thing to know what you're capable of and to miss it. And it's another thing to just never try, right? It's really hard to actually be humble if you don't know the power that God has entrusted you with. If you don't recognize and receive the impact that God desires and designed you to make. If we just think, I need to play small and stay to the background and never actually step into what God has for us, we're not actually humble, we're just afraid. And I think Peter in this moment is like many of us, certainly myself in many seasons where I'm just afraid. I let the voices that are in my own head from the things I've done in the past speak too loudly over what Jesus actually is inviting me into, saying, you can, and I want to tell him, no, you don't understand, I can't. And Jesus says, no, I want you to know what it's like to be restored, because then you will be so much better at helping other people be restored in the future. And Peter immediately, as the story goes on, tries to compare his purpose and his direction with other people. And Jesus basically says, don't worry about them. Do what I've asked you to do. And this is for all of us, right? Like, if we want to become all who God dreams and designed us to be, this idea that Jesus kind of creates for Peter and John records for us at the end of his gospel is a really, really powerful thing that I think we have to actually wrestle with. That we have to actually ask the assumptive question, was this only for Peter, or was this recorded because it's actually for all of us? That if I want to love Jesus, the invitation from Jesus in different ways for all of us, but the invitation is to actually serve and take care of others. That following Jesus isn't actually about what I get from Jesus, although that will happen, but it's actually what do I do with what I've received from Jesus. That maybe you said it different ways. I hear it all the time in conversations of I want to be more like Jesus, right? And we all have different opinions and ideas and perspectives about what that might look like. And if you have that desire, that's a great desire, right? I'm glad you have that. Maybe that's why you're here today. But if you want to be more like Jesus, there is not anything that Jesus talked about, demonstrated, or modeled more clearly than this idea of serving other people. It is inescapable in the New Testament. That if you and I want to be more like Jesus, if we are to look through the Bible at the things Jesus clearly taught and the values that he modeled, what very quickly emerges is one of radical, sacrificial serving, giving himself away to others without expecting anything in return most times, even at great cost to self. And that is actually what Jesus invites you and I into. Not just the super spiritual ones and the small group leaders and the pastors and the priests, but that actually everyone who decides to follow Jesus is invited to express his love to the world by how we serve others. And it's going to take different forms and different ways for each and every one of us. That's the beauty of this life with Jesus, right? But even if you're not a follower of Jesus, even if you're not really a church person, you know that when you're around people that have a bend towards serving other people, that you want to spend more time with them. You want to work for them. You want to live next to them. They don't, they're not the ones that drive you crazy. Like even people that don't believe in God or don't trust the Bible, right? Even if they might have a million opinions that are different than what Jesus might actually say, when they see this or live this out, where people are less selfish, more patient, they notice that they become more purposeful. And I wonder if you were to think about this in your own life, right? Even if you're not sure what you believe about God, if you were to try to kind of put on this Jesus way this week, how would your life shift? How would your relationships change as you go back to school, right? And you had a mindset, right, of instead of trying to prove yourself, to actually show up and be the friend you want to have. In your marriage or in our politics, if we were trying to outserve each other rather than outshout each other, right? What would it look like if you went to work tomorrow with this mindset of I don't need to lose or change positions or jobs within my industry, but I can actually change how I show up in my job and in my industry. That I'm excited to actually look for ways to lift others up in the process of what I'm doing. What would your spouse or boyfriend or girlfriend or coworker or boss think of a shift like this in your life? I think universally they would appreciate it. And so if we know that to be true, if we know that that is something that no matter where we are in the spiritual spectrum, as humans, we understand, and especially for those of us that have decided in some form or fashion to love and follow Jesus, well then how this aligns to our purpose is extraordinarily important. Because the truth is that according to the scriptures, according to Jesus, that our purpose is found in the process of serving others. The purpose that you have been designed to fulfill is discovered, it's found in the process of serving others. Think back to the story of Nehemiah from last week, where he had a clear purpose, but yet in the middle, when things were kind of getting difficult, he aligned and assigned different people in the nation to have their individual purpose that fulfilled the larger mission. That they all found their spot in the wall, and he said, fight for your families and your homes. Like build the thing that matters most to you in the context of this larger story that God is writing. And I think for so many of us, we often think we have to find something big and something extraordinary to run after as a personal mission. And that may not always be true, right? We don't necessarily always have to have our own individual personal mission in the world, but we all, like it's in us, we all need a mission that we can commit to personally. That maybe your mission is coming alongside someone else at your company, or coming alongside your spouse to raise incredible children. Maybe your personal mission may not be something that you kind of exude and do on your own. Maybe it's something you do in community with a collective of other people. And I think about this idea, right, that Peter was restored not to just be forgiven for his past, but to actually propel him into his future, and that the thing that Jesus told him to do was to serve, was to love and to take care of other people. And so I wanted to kind of reenact that story in our own way here within Restoration Church this morning. That I wanted to actually help you, if you came into Restoration Church on any given Sunday, to experience all of the unique ways that individuals have found a way to participate in a collective mission through their own personal way of serving. All right, so servant leaders that are ready, this is your moment, okay? So if you come to on Sunday, you come to Restoration Church, you're going to experience many different servant leaders. So you're driving up, you're coming down the street, and you turn, and out in the middle of Via Frontera, you see Eric. And Eric's waving you in, right? He's waving you in to help you find out, hey, you're at the right spot. And it's not because you don't know how to drive or you don't know how to park. Like you made it all the way here and it's that last 30 yards that's really going to get you, right? No, it's because we have a value of setting the table. And Eric knows that sometimes when you go to a church for the first time, right before you get there, you get nervous. And when you see him and Axel, his son, out there, and you're like, oh, they're normal people. I can belong here. And all of a sudden, you're at ease because you feel thought of, you feel cared for. And then you finally park and you walk in, and the first thing you see is a coffee bar, and you're like, this is great. Like, I can actually have something in my hand, which is kind of like a defense shield. We haven't gotten our liquor license yet, so all we can do is coffee. But Eva's there, right? And Eva's making you coffee because everyone knows it's easier to have a conversation with someone when you have a drink in your hand. And then you keep moving and you see Patrick and his daughter Fiona sometimes, and they welcome you in and they say, hey, we're so glad that you're here. And you haven't even gotten in the door yet. This is just to get to the building. And they show up to make sure that you have a great experience. And then if you have kids, you check your kids in, and if you have a baby, you might drop them off and give them to Hey Young, who loves them and sits with them and cares for them, and they can never say thank you. If you have a preschooler, Ola's going to welcome you in and teach them with songs and crafts about what it means to love and follow Jesus as a 3 to 5-year-old. Or if you have an elementary school, they might meet Will or many of our other leaders who are serving to help students in Restoration Kids know that they have a purpose and a story. And don't worry, there are people watching your kids right now, right? They were off this week, right? But if that feeling motivates you, hold on to it, okay? So, and then finally, after just getting into the building, you come into this room. And the team that has practiced all week is leading you in worship. And Kat sings a song that it just strikes the core of what you're feeling. And maybe you grew up in church, maybe you didn't, but you discover that there are songs that actually honestly talk about the seasons of our soul, right? And the reason that you can follow along with what Kat is singing is because Kyle and the production team are back there making sure the sound is on and the lyrics are on the screen, and that if you're watching online that you can see it because of the video team. right? And our production team does an incredible job, and they work so hard. And that's just what happens in the morning, right? If you have students in middle school or high school, you bring them back on Sunday nights, and Lena and the Restoration Students team feeds them dinner, plays games with them, helps them know that they're loved. We still got ways to go. We might need to scooch down just a little bit, right? And they have a great time. Or you sign up for a life group, and someone like Leslie or other of our life group leaders connects with you throughout the week to help make sure that not only is church an event on Sunday. See, you want in on this. I can feel it, right? It's not just an event that we come to on Sunday, but it's actually a community where you build friendships. And if you do what Kevin said and you decide to trust God with your finances through the ministry of Restoration Church, which is a big, powerful, soul-shaping decision, people like Avery serve on our stewardship team to help make sure that everything else happens in our church and outside of our church, and that your resources are managed with the utmost kingdom care. And this is just a few of the ways that people serve. And I just want to tell you, as one of the pastors of this church, I get the back of their heads, right? But like, I love these people. And I'm so grateful for these people. I'm so grateful that my daughter and my sons have people like Will and Ola and Leslie to pour into their life, that partner with us, to say similar things to what we're saying at home, because our daughter's going into fourth grade and getting to that point where what mom and dad say doesn't matter anymore, right? And we want that in our life. I'm so glad that when we invest our finances, that it's not just in a pot somewhere and hopefully everything turns out okay. I'm so glad that when we invite friends that they know, that we trust that when they show up, before they even get in here, because it's awkward when you invite someone and you're like, oh, by the way, I'm the one that's going to be talking. It's like, it's weird, so just hang with me. But the experience they have all the way up before that is worth sticking around for. It's so fun to see neighbors of ours now own the mission of this church, and that their lives have been changed, and that our kids are going to school on Wednesday together. Like, this isn't about getting stuff done. Like this and the many, many others, many of you as I'm looking around, and the many others that are on active duty right now, right, are helping make this mission happen. So can we thank our servant leaders together? Thank you all. Thank you. Love you guys. Have a seat. So here's the question. I know, like me, in that moment when you think about all that just happens so that this experience is available to you and your family, I know that you're grateful. I know you are. The question is for all of us, will that gratitude move us towards generosity? And when we say generosity, first thing we have to think about is financial, but that's actually not the root word of generosity. Generosity means to generate something in the world. And you can do that with your time, you can do that with your resources, right? But for you, as you think about your own personal life, your story, your gifts, the things that you're naturally good at, that if you want to become all of who God's created you to be, I hope that this morning you will take that step to make serving other people in your life something that is normal. And you might be wondering, how do I do that? Like, what does that take? And we just want to be honest with you. Not only will we help train you in the areas that you want to serve in, but we actually ask very little of servant leaders. We actually ask people to serve one Sunday a month. And I know one is infinitely more than zero, but it is the smallest number we could think of. So all we're asking you to do is do a little more than nothing, right? And it's not just because we're like desperate. Like we didn't leave all the kids in the rooms to do that illustration. That would be desperate. It's actually because we believe what Jesus said to Peter. That when you love God, serving becomes normal in your life. That if your spiritual journey is leading you towards Jesus, finding a place to regularly, systematically, intentionally serve others is a part of that journey. That you can't outlearn what serving will give you. That there's no way to actually love and follow Jesus for a lifetime and avoid stepping into a place where you are using the gifts that he has given you to serve others. So you think back to that story, right? Jesus not only loved his followers so much that he came back from the dead, right? But then he decides to serve them breakfast. That his first move is one of service. His first move is one of hospitality. And I think this is an extraordinarily missing thing in modern church conversations. We want to tell people what we believe or tell them what they need to change. And the model of Jesus, the first thing we do is we serve people. That we actually show them how much God loves them by how we serve them. So he serves them breakfast, but then he invites them to include what they have to offer as well into that meal. Oftentimes we will go, well, God will take care of it. And that's true. But you want to know how God takes care of it? Through you, through me, through many of yous. That's how God takes care of it. And again, I just want you to make sure you don't miss this, right? Jesus made a way for you and I to have a relationship with God, and it cost him his life. But he didn't just die for you. He lives for you. And that is actually a more powerful invitation, because that's something that you and I can actually do. I was having a conversation with a couple about a year ago, and they were in a really tough spot. And I remember one of them said, I would die for them. I would die for my partner. And all I said was, will you live for them? Will you maybe adjust some of the things that they're saying that you do in your life that make them feel less than valued, make them feel less important? Will you live for them? I think the same is true for us. It's easy to go, oh, I love God so much. His invitation to us is care for others, care for people. And just like Jesus gave a gift and served his followers and invited them to do the same, Jesus actually gifts you to be a gift to others. That, like we said last week, the invitation from Jesus is not just to believe in God. It's to believe in God and recognize that God already, more than you can imagine, believes in you and has supernaturally gifted you in an area to actually serve other people. And you're like, well, I don't know if I believe that. And the reason you don't believe that is that supernatural gift, it just comes so naturally to you. Like you hear Aaron and Tracy sing today, you're just like, oh my goodness, I couldn't do that. Believe me, you do not want me to try. Good, Kurt, stay off the top stage, stay where you belong, right? And you have gifts too, and they're not like other people's. And that's by design. But that doesn't mean that you aren't gifted. Jesus has gifted you to be a gift to others. And I know in many of our minds, we got all the excuses running right now, right? I'm too busy. It takes so much energy. I'm already just trying to juggle all the things in my life and even get to church on time-ish, 10:15-ish, right? Or maybe it's they seem like they have it all figured out, like everything's covered. And yeah, right now, everything's covered. But you got to know you're in a community that isn't ready to settle for things as they always have been forever. And that there are greater visions for your kids and the future of this church and your neighbors who have yet to show up. But to get there, we want and need more of you to step in and use the gifts that God has given you, right? Maybe you're like, oh, this idea of serving, yeah, that's great. That's great in Jesus' life, or for those who've been following Jesus for a long time. But I don't even know if I believe this yet, or I have too many doubts. Certainly they wouldn't want to put me in a serving role if I vote like someone differently, or I look differently, or I listen to different music. And again, this is the beauty of this story. Peter thought he had done far too much to be used by God. That was his standing, operating perception of his life. And Jesus goes right after it and says, no. You might think it's too far, but that's just because you don't understand how grace works. And so whatever excuse you and I want to bring, the love of God is bigger and stronger to break it down and say, there's a role for you. If you're in middle school, there's a role for you. If you're in high school, there's a role for you in the story of God. If you're single or if you're married, if you don't have kids or you feel like you have too many kids, there is a role for you. It's the last week of summer, right? I mean, think about it. Just take the church part out of it for a second. If serving became a natural part of your life, for those of you that are married in the room, how are you serving your spouse? If there are ways that you served your spouse and met your partner's need ahead of your own this week, would your relationship get better or get worse? In 20 years of professional ministry, Kay and I have yet to have couples counseling with anyone who said, I just can't stand my husband. He serves me so much. I just can't handle it anymore. Never once, right? Can you imagine your spouse's response if you got home 30 minutes early and brought dinner? You don't have to worry about it. You got it covered. Like, what's something that you could do this week to make serving normal in that relationship? When you go to work tomorrow, what if you walked into your office with a different lens, like I said before, seeing the people there not there to serve your goals and mission, but actually you are there, even if you're at the top of the organizational chart, to serve and make their lives better. Rather than putting people down to lift yourself up, what if you do just enough to make it, but you then decide to go one step further and to make someone's day? Not to get noticed, but to actually just serve like Jesus. What if you made it a goal this week to not just check off your to-do list, but to give 5 compliments every day to someone in your office? How would that shift? And again, you can do this even if you're not the boss, right? Roommates, instead of mastering your balancing skills, putting one more dish on the pile in the sink, I've heard, allegedly, right? Or keeping score of who cleaned up last time or who got to park in the garage, right? What if there was a part of you that actually found joy in serving your roommates and not keeping score? For those of you who are regularly involved in a serving team around here, thank you, thank you, thank you. But for those of you that have yet to step into it, I want to boldly invite you to step into a team that matches the gifts that God has placed in your life. Not because, thank you, not because we need or God needs something from you, but because I want to promise you God has something for you. I grew up in church my whole life, and it wasn't until I was 16 years old that I heard about the idea of spiritual gifts, and it radically transformed my relationship with Jesus. Because all of a sudden, it's not just something to believe or to adhere to or behave within. It is something to go after on an adventure with God of discovering who you are, who you've been designed to be, and how you can make a difference in the world. That we are participating when we serve in the epicenter of God's activity in the world. So like I said, I know you're grateful that this church is here. And my question is, will that move us to go beyond just attending to actually participating? To actually say, hey, I want to get involved, even with our flaws and our in-processness, just like Peter did. So, you didn't see this coming. I know you're shocked. But here's a QR code. And I really want to invite you, if you are not serving somewhere regularly on a team, would you grab your phone and would you scan this? And it's going to take you to a website on the internet with our church where it's our servant leader webpage. And on that webpage, if you scroll down, you can see all the different serving opportunities that we have available. And what's incredible is some of them are here on Sundays that you'll notice right away, so that we highlighted even just a moment ago. Some of them don't happen here on Sundays that you maybe didn't even know existed. And under each of them have the opportunity, a little bit of a description, what we ask of them. Most of them, like I said, are just one Sunday a month. And the spiritual gifts or the kind of personality types that would best fit that serving role. And so I want to encourage you, scan that, pray about it, walk through it, because here's what's so incredible about what God says about you, and with this I'll close, right? That in Ephesians 2, 8 through 10, the Apostle Paul is writing to these people that have started to love and follow Jesus in the town of Ephesus, and he's encouraging them not that Jesus just invites them to believe something, but to become someone. And notice what he says. This is so powerful. In Ephesians 2, starting in verse 8, it says, "For it's by God's grace that you've been restored." And Peter would say, amen. Yeah. You've received it through faith. It's not your plan or effort. It's God's gift, pure and simple. We didn't earn it. Not one of us did. So we don't get to go around bragging that we've done something amazing. But then don't miss this. But that doesn't negate what he says following. But we are the product of his hand. That heaven's poetry is etched on our lives, created in Christ Jesus, that you have been created in Christ Jesus to accomplish the good works that God arranged for you long ago. Do you believe that? Because if we're just floating through life going, I don't really know what I'm here for. I don't really know why it matters. I don't even know if God has anything for me. Then we make Paul a liar. And I wouldn't want to do that. Because I think this story, this invitation is just a more beautiful way to live. And when you step into that understanding, that reality, and you decide there have been good works that have been set aside, designed by God for me to accomplish even before I knew what to do, and you start to explore and run after that promise, you will discover that God all along has been inviting you into that kind of life of uncovering and becoming a person who serves. And not only will that bless other people, but it will bless you as well. Because I believe that God has something for you. God has something for you that he knows you cannot get anywhere or any way else than serving other people. It doesn't come without sacrifice. It doesn't come without inconvenience or cost, but that is worth it. It is the way to gain what God has for you, so that sacrifice is worth it. So the question for all of us is, where in your life are you regularly, consistently, intentionally becoming more like Jesus by serving? And if you don't know or have a good answer that satisfies your soul to that question, scan the QR code. We want to help. We want to help you discover who God's created you to be by finding a place in the story that God is writing at this church and getting on one of our servant leader teams. We believe that not only will it help move the mission of Restoration Church forward, but that your purpose will be found in the process of serving others. We believe that. So let me pray for you. God, thank you so much for the gift of your example. Not just what we see in the scriptures that you did, Jesus, but what people have done for thousands of years up until right now to help shape and lead us towards you. I'm so thankful for the servant leaders of this church who trust you, who have said, God, you have risked your reputation on us, and we want to love well by serving others. I pray for anyone in this room or listening to this online who feels very much like Peter, that they feel unworthy, they feel they're too far gone, they're frustrated and maybe going back to old patterns or old excuses of why they can't. God, I pray that they would hear your whisper, drawing them closer, and they would take a step towards you. We may not always know what the future holds, but we do know that our purpose is found in the process of serving others. So help us to be the kinds of people that step into this kingdom life that's challenging but so simple. It feels backwards at times, and yet it works and it makes sense, and it looks and it feels and it sounds like you, Jesus. The one who said, I came not to be served, but to serve others and to give my life as a ransom for many. So Jesus, we say thank you. We want to follow your example, and we want to worship you. So it's in your name we pray and sing and serve. Amen and amen.